Welcome to the Future of Work podcast. Today, we'll discuss the shifting workplace landscape with Nirit Cohen, whose 3 decades of experience as a senior global HR leader at Intel and her many contributions on the future of work to Forbes magazine make her the ideal guest to redefine success as we explore workforce transformation and the future of less work. We'll discuss what it means to work less in a world where time, productivity, and success are being reimagined, and how organizations measure and lead with traditional metrics no longer apply. Join us as we explore these trends with Nirit, whose leadership experience and insightful expertise offer a powerful lens into the future.
Nirit, welcome to the Future Work podcast. Really excited to have you with us today. And all the way from Israel, all the way from senior positions at Intel, writing for Forbes, an amazing background that you've got. Tell us a little bit about yourself. And I'm really interested. You write a lot on the future of less work. I'd like to know a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see how this concept really resonates with people, yet obviously,
Well, I like less work.
Organizations struggle still. I think when you look at the trends of what we're seeing, develop over the past, decade into maybe the next decade, there's some combination of the technology that we always talk about, right? But it's also very big demographic shifts in terms of maybe sociology, right? That the how people relate to work and life and everything in between. And it started way before COVID. We talk about COVID, right? But you could see these trends, developing. You could see workations and digital nomads. So the tools that let us get disconnected and move away from the desk, and work stopped becoming a place you go to and became something you do. And for a really long time, we just did more of it, right? And we went to the office, we did our office hours, and we went home and we stayed connected on our Blackberries and our laptops and our cell phones. And then over time, you kind of see how people realized that also meant they didn't necessarily need to be working wherever they lived. So they started reaching out, and you could see the more kind of global teams, and we learned to be a little more mobile. And then COVID hit, and it was a realization that life is short, and every day we go to work is a day of our life that we trade. And so people woke up to asking some questions, and they were wondering whether this is what I want to do. So you take these trends and you're watching what's going on today, and you see how people are really negotiating between work and life and everything in between. And I call that the future of less work, because I think that we're going to see success redefined and work redefined and being a successful person redefined.
I wonder. You and I are in different parts of the world today. I'm in Texas. You're in Tel Aviv. Is this a first world country issue? How does this concept impact developing nations and third world nations? Can someone afford the future of less work if they're in a subsistence society? Are they willing to afford the future of less work if they're in a developing economy where the government and every aspect of life is about bootstrapping themselves and moving themselves forward?
It's a really good question.
I really think that, like, we've just had an election in this country, as you know, the world knows, and it's all about competitiveness. I mean, a lot of the election was around the competitiveness of the United States on a world stage. And if countries are like large corporations looking for market share, are they really going to allow their employees, their population to work less?
I think we need to unpack a number of things in the question, right? First of all, there's an assumption that working less is about um, not being able to live the life that you need and want. And again, go back to history, right? People used to work more than 8 hours a day, more than 5 days a week. In fact, I came into the workforce, we were still working 6 days a week. And yeah, and so it's not that long ago. And the whole idea of the 8 hour, work day is an industrial revolution kind of concept that talked about,
Unionism.
exactly. So, and the fact that you're not allowed to employ kids and, they have to go to school is, again, one of these things that we take for granted, but wasn't once upon a time, the normal situation. So what does it mean in terms of what's the standard, normal amount of work? If you actually go back to history, the successful people in, think about the, England society didn't work. They had people working for them, but they went from tea room to tea room, right? So the definition of success, talking about wearing a badge of honor and saying things like, oh, I had an 11 p.m. meeting, that's something from the last, few decades, but it wasn't in maybe the last 100 years.
Well, I think that's true when you talk about, British society in the 17th, 18th centuries, you're really talking about, we'll refer to as landed gentry or people that had, capital. I have a friend, who inherited, he's a Londoner, and he inherited, from a family company, and his comment is, "Well, I don't need to work, I have capital." So his investments was his work,
Yeah.
managing his investments, and he's done reasonably well. Not amazingly well, but reasonably well. He's sustained his capital, which as a 3rd or 4th generation is, always kinda shaky. Um, and so capital works on behalf of individuals, a lot of whenever possible. And I think that if you look at retirement today in the United States, or the concept of retirement is you achieve enough capital so that you can live off of that capital in your supposed golden years, without having to work, which
Yeah.
is, again, an entirely new concept for an individual to accomplish that, as opposed to having accomplished it through a hereditary system of the landed gentry, so to speak, and that's a global thing. It didn't matter where.
Right, but if you stick with these trends, by the way, movements like FIRE, which is, retire early concepts, right?
Mhm.
So let how much is enough, and how much do you need to live in, and what does success mean? So let's shift to, you asked about the world, right? So you look at Asia, and you have cultures where the one child needed to take care of, two sets of parents.
Mhm.
Or you had Japanese culture where work is really, really important in a person's life. It's actually almost, to the degree of family. And you see hashtags come up by the younger generation that talk about work less, lying flat. So all these hashtags that talk about what is enough and where does work fit into what I want to do. So I'm not suggesting that the future of less work literally, in the sense of we're all going to, just work less and somebody will or will not pay for it. But if you go watch the trends, um, things are getting cheaper. So if you go back to the basics, why do people go to work? They want food, they want shelter, they need clothing. The cost of food, the cost of shelter, the cost of clothing, when you look at technology, right? And you look at what's become part of what the government gives you, right? So once upon a time, school was not given to everyone, right? Today it's a public service and we expect it. So who says that if you fast forward, a decade, there will not be more things that will become expected? And I don't want to, throw around terms like universal basic income because they don't sound right. But if you think about the concept of, do you really need to work for your very basic food, shelter, or you work for something else? So you put technology in there and start watching what it does to our lives and how it enables us. I think we're looking at this trend here.
I get what you're saying, and I don't disagree with it necessarily, but I'm curious what your thoughts would be in today's how this relates, especially as it relates to government support, in today's aging society and in a society where we're not keeping and sustaining, I'll say a diminishing or a shrinking society, where we're not sustaining in two-thirds of the world birth rates that are sustainable. We're having a shrinking population in two-thirds of the world as opposed to a growing population. And it's an aging society. So how does that relate to the future of less work or the interdependence upon government programs to help support because you've got a diminished workforce and tax base?
So it's a really good question, and I would suggest to think about these trends as feeding the same trend. So the way we work today, right, is you study up to your end of your 20s, you kind of you get your definition of who you are professionally. Then you work for
And
30.
then hopefully you forget it all because that's not the real world.
Plus it's no longer, it ages very quickly, but historically that's the deal they made with us. Go get a good profession by the end of your 20s, and you got about 35, 40 years of work. So go into the workplace, you look up, you see your manager, their manager, their manager. That's your career, right there. And then you'll retire one day and go do all the fun things you never got around to doing. That was a model where work cycle and life cycle got intertwined in these three periods. Well, you look at it today, and if you start understanding that you can come in and out of degrees of work, it's like you can go up, and you can also you go down, and it's retirement doesn't need to be 100 to 0. It can be I'm going to do things I like. I'm going to do less of them. I need less because I have maybe some savings and maybe less expenses. But I'm going to do it longer because I'm going to live longer and I'm healthier. And I don't want to just not do anything and only volunteer or, stay at home. And then when you realize that, and you realize that organizations are going to need to be able to work with people who aren't regular full-time employees, and this whole unbundling of employment and ownership, and even the idea that people work for you, they're just yours, and that's the only thing
Mhm.
they do. And we see that unbundling. And once that unravels, it can unravel earlier. You don't need to wait to retirement. You can say, you know what, I have my kids now. I want to work and
Yeah.
have kids, or I want to go study something new because this whatever I studied in my 20s is no longer relevant. So I want to take some time for that, and reduce my workload a bit.
Well, no, I think that's right. We have um, all companies hire interns, and they're college students or graduate students, et cetera, and you hire interns and you bring them into the workforce, et cetera. Let's create the terms as externs, people that are accomplished, but don't want to work permanently or don't want to work in a singular position overall. And instead of hiring in addition to hiring interns, let's hire a workforce of externs
Yeah.
uh, and think through that concept. And that comes with your unbundling. I think what you're really talking about, and I shouldn't say it like that, I apologize, but I think it's really simple. It's just work-life balance. And that has to start when you're young. I also, and this is a personal belief of mine, um, I think as human beings that we should be productive until we are no longer able to be. And that productivity can be what you would traditionally think of as work, or it can be charitable, or it can be any number of things. But our productivity shouldn't be diminished just because we've had a certain number of birthdays.
Yeah.
And take yourself. Will you ever stop writing?
Why would I? Oh, unless I no longer want to.
That's my point. That's a form of work.
I
Will I
agree.
ever stop doing what I do? A lot of people would like me to, but I'm not gonna. And I mean, have you ever seen? Did Picasso retire?
And see, that's exactly it. Yeah, it's exactly it because it sits on this idea that work is a very boxed definition that includes, going to a place, doing this thing, the same thing all the time. It has a shape. And we're seeing that unbundle, right? So, who says that if you're doing a bit of writing or podcasting and you're making money doing, some business on the side, and then you're studying something? In fact, I say these days that every one of us probably end up with about 4 careers in parallel. So you're going to have the remnants of your previous career, which you're still milking somewhat, right?
Well, hopefully you are, because you've gained a ton of knowledge. You don't want to give that up.
Absolutely. And then you have like whatever it is that you're, living off and putting most of your time and attention to today, which is your current career. You know that that current career is going to down cycle at some point. It's not an if, it's a when. And so you're keeping your eyes on what's that next thing. And it could be, just thinking, looking, going to meetings, but it could also be studying or learning something new or actually actively starting something. So kind of the beginnings of your next career. And on the side, we have this activity that we don't consider career, but if you stop thinking about careers as employment and think about them as accumulation of skills and experience, your hobbies, your volunteer activity, those are careers. And a lot of people, we know that with data, right? Sometime in kind of midlife, they turn into something that actually you want to do full time or a lot of your time.
Well, it's funny. The concept of a career didn't really exist until the late 19th, early 20th century. And I would say if we have something to escape, people probably not like this comment, but I think it's our educational system. Our system of education today, get good grades in high school, be extracurricular, get into a good college so you can get a good job. You go to a good college so you can get a good job. It's not really a whole man teaching theory or a whole person teaching
Yeah.
theory. Say you go to college, and I said this when I was going to college. I got kicked out of college, by the way, and or asked not to return. There is a difference. Um, and I think when I was in business classes in my first couple years at college, I thought all you guys are doing is teaching me to go to work for IBM. You're teaching me how to go to work for someone else, but you're not teaching me how to think and create
Yeah.
exclusively for myself. And I actually I had to leave college. I wasn't happy. I ended up going back, and that was okay. But I went back an English literature major with a philosophy minor. Figure that out in business.
Which somebody would say to you, but that's not what would you do with that?
What would you do with that? Well, you would learn how to communicate and think.
That's the difference between professions and skills, and we're seeing that today.
And guess my point is that if we look at our educational system, and the values that we structure that around, it should be to not work for someone else, but to create a lifestyle that's balanced for yourself and your family as well. You don't necessarily have to get the good job at the big company to be successful.
Yeah, you're right. And we see that, by the way, with data. So if you watch the number of people that are self-employed, even part-time, right? Or the 1099 economy, that's the idea that you're making money off of something in addition to. A lot of these people are salaried employees, but they've got this other thing going. And you watch the number of people who went self-employed, and those numbers are consistently growing. And the idea that stability comes from profession or employer, we realized a lot of that's not true. And people are building In fact, stability comes from staying relevant in the job market. And, at some point, you talk about, life cycles. At some point, you don't want somebody deciding whether you can do this or not. You want to be able to pick and choose what you do, how much you do, when you do, because you do want to work on whatever it is that you want to. You can afford to do it, to have a different balance. So we're actually seeing the numbers there, and I think there's this generation that started out with a different context around work, is having a hard time letting go. But if you actually look at the young people, they're not confused. They're not confused about the idea that they have to do just one thing.
This is maybe goofy. I would much rather hire a Gen Z than a millennial, just because of the different processes and the way that people think overall. The youngest generation right now is thinking much more independently than the previous couple of generations. One is more group think than independent individual think, and
Yeah.
you definitely see that. It's funny when we have a little onboarding. Every company has an onboarding or orientation process, and in ours, one of the management speeches when someone joins a firm is, "Hey, here's the one thing we will fire you for. Absolutely, no question about it. Pay real close attention to this. If you don't make your own decisions, if you can't make decisions by gathering enough data to put yourself in the right direction, you slow the entire organization down
Yeah.
and you just don't belong here." And when they make wrong decisions, we'll stand behind it because everybody makes wrong decisions. I sure do. Um, but if you can let your good ones run and shut your bad ones off short quickly, but you just make lots of decisions, you will go forward more quickly. You'll learn more, you'll grow more, you'll help more, you'll contribute more to whatever you're doing.
Yeah.
Uh, and so that's to us working less or working from anywhere or not climbing the corporate ladder, but instead, as you say, climbing the corporate rock wall. Um, all those things really come down to, in our company, decision making.
Yeah.
How quickly and how often and how collaboratively can you make decisions?
Yeah, and they'll circle back to the education system, right? So the idea that there's a right answer, I'll teach you the right answer, I'll test you to see if you remember, and you'll get an A. And then you come out in the world, and the whole point is there isn't a right answer, and I'm not even sure I know what the right question is, and that's what you need to figure out, right? So so this so yeah,
Throw them out in the woods and tell them to get to the other side.
yeah.
Uh, a lot of times that's a much better learning experience than the classroom experience.
Yeah, and I think we're seeing that slowly, and we'll figure it out. I mean, the it's almost like you've got this, I don't know, 100,000 piece puzzle, and we've kind of disintegrated everything we've known about what's a profession and content and knowledge and how do you accumulate it, and then all the way to how do you build an organization. We're seeing this fragmentation. In jobs and professions and skills and even the definition, like I said, of what is a good worker and what is success and how does that fit into my life. And we're trying to put it back together again, and we will figure it out. But right now it's a bit scattered, and we're still trying to put the pieces back together. And the interesting thing is different people are putting them back together in different ways, which is different from the mold that we're used to, where this is what it looked like.
Well, it's funny. I often think historically that we say a good worker is a person does this and that, and my simplification of it is a good person, a good worker, whether it's myself or anybody else, is a person that masters and continually remasters the tools that are available for them to make progress.
Yeah.
Today, we're faced with the opportunity of artificial intelligence. And I say the opportunity rather than the issue. And I think is artificial intelligence, in my view, is a tool. It's nothing more, nothing less. And the opportunity of how to utilize that to advance civilization, our society, certainly our individual careers, uh, every aspect of our personal life as well, is pretty interesting right now.
Yeah.
And those people that master those tools, um, like a tradesperson who becomes an apprentice and then a craftsman and then a master of some discipline, are the people that will be able to have the future of less work effectively because they'll be creating using the tools rather than just their time.
Yeah.
And time is God, it is the one equalizer. You know, we all have a certain number of hours in the day and a certain number of days in a year, and probably a certain number of years with which to accomplish things. And so, learning to be the master of all the tools that are available to you is critical.
Yeah, I think, there's two really interesting things going on in this space. One is, and you're right, the changes though are so quick that you cannot rely on learning as we were used to talking about learning, right? It's not somebody will teach you what you need to know. So we've been talking about lifelong learning for years now, or learning organizations, and now it's here. And you cannot know what you need to know if you're not learning all the time. So to taking time, budget, attention, putting it aside, owning it, being responsible for it, and learning what you need to know. Right. So I mean, that's one of these things is you take your eyes off the ball for, I don't know, 24 hours and 15 new tools, that are relevant to what you're doing just came into being and you didn't even know that.
Well, and you have to define which tools are good too. There
Yeah.
are tools that are just fluff, and then there are tools that are important. You know, it's interesting. You're talking about lifelong learning, and I mentioned Picasso earlier, never retiring. Um, a good artist, no, I shouldn't say a good artist. The greatest artists that we are aware of have gone through a progression of lifelong learning. And when you look at the style, if you want to call it that, of what they produced in their earliest years versus the different transitions they went through
Right.
by association with others, by experimentation, by perception, sometimes by pure ego. Welcome to the world of Dolly. Um, the That's really what you're talking about is that progression of learning through experimentation and association.
Right. And ownership, self-ownership. So it's not going to be taught.
Absolutely.
You need to, right. And then the second aspect of this is you talked about time, right? So historically, if an employee became more effective because you put in a new machine, right? They made more product and the company
Mhm.
owner of the
Yeah.
machine made more money and the employee worked the same amount of hours for, same amount of pay. What we're seeing these days is a negotiation over who gets the benefit of the time that gets created by AI. So organizations are still acting as if I'm giving you the tools, you do, more work more effectively, and I'll give you more work to do. And that goes back to the future of less work. People are actually saying, I'm not sure I agree with that, right? If I figured out how to use these tools and now I'm making more with less, right? I want some of the benefits of that
Mhm.
to myself. And I might want to go either study or, take a trip or just not do anything. I'm not going to give you back all my time. You don't own my time. So we talk, we get wrapped up in words like hybrid and number of days in the office, and that's not interesting conversation. The interesting conversation is, are you looking at input as in, showing up, getting paid for having shown up, which is really what salaried employees are, or the other side is, are you looking at, output, which is you've contracted with me to deliver my value, my expertise, whatever we set is my goal, and how fast I get it done, as long as it's what you need, is none of your business. And there's this two extreme conversation going on right now.
You know, it's funny. We've been talking about employees, Let's talk about management. Let's talk about the most senior executives at the largest corporations of the world, and the outsized compensation they receive in the view of many for their actual contribution, or sometimes the outsized compensation they receive just to get kicked out because they've done a bad job, et cetera. How do you rectify the value of those types of contributions with the value of the contributions of the proverbial employee that you've been talking about?
You know, it's actually really interesting because I think before you touch on the pay of executives, watch the RTO debate, which is really like a tug of war between leadership who gets their power and knows how to yield it from the office building full of people, the meetings, the presentations, the
Mhm.
travel, right? And people who are saying, I'm not going back to that way of work and life, right? I will deliver, but I'm not going to show up and mark my hours in a building just because you want me to. And I think that one of the really interesting things going on is that senior leadership, they're smart people. They know how to read the trends, right? They've been doing it for years. It's not that they don't understand the world of work is changing, but they really don't understand how to lead corporations to success and deliver shareholder value without the office buildings full of people and the processes that come with them. And so one of the biggest challenges in the next, few years is actually figuring out, how do you lead an organization where the right people are working on the right things at the right time with the right tools, regardless of time and place and space, right? Which is going to
Well,
be really interesting.
in that regard, I'm kind of a data freak, so I'll relate things to that. That an organization today needs to be have a methodology by which they can measure those things one against the other, in order to determine whether they are making real progress or whether they're just shuffling things around, and it's a feel good activity almost. Because if everybody has the same freedom, think of a sporting team. We're in the football season right now, and if everyone just ran their own play, well, not scoring would get kind of confusing. Well, let's see. You want to run and do this. I'm going to run and do that. You've got to have a way of managing that organization to a single endpoint of productivity.
Yeah.
I think that's where a lot of companies, because we deal with a lot of HR organizations or large companies, putting together hybrid work programs and things of that nature from through another company that we have, and boy, they're confused.
Yeah.
They don't know how to track the data
Right.
on productivity, and
Yeah.
there's a big we're in this area where that's very challenging right now, and everybody wants what they want. But unless you can take the data to become information, to turn into knowledge, to allow action, unless you've got that string working for you, then you're just going to have chaos in all of this.
Yeah.
And I think that's where certain executives today are saying, "Okay, we're going to do it all this way. This is everybody back to the office," because they don't have a way of collecting enough information to know that they are productive.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I would add something slightly tweaked to that. First of all, you're right, because like I said, we used to pay people for showing up, and suddenly you need to
Yeah.
do something different. But then on top of that, you know how we talk about AI, it gives you the right answer, but if you don't know how it got there, you're uncomfortable, right?
Yep. You got to know the right question.
We talk about explainable AI these days, right? So that we wanted to explain how we got there. So I think that's another piece. So even if the organization's functioning as a manager, you don't understand how it got there because it's not doing what you're used to doing. It's almost like, back to the sports metaphor, you take a player from NBA and a player from football and a player from tennis, you put them together and you say play. It's like, what game am I playing, right? What's winning in this game?
Well, a tennis player should win because it's the only thinking sport.
Uh-huh.
No, I think that's right. And sadly, I think we brought up more questions today than answers. But maybe that's the challenge that we should be laying with our audience.
We must have done something good, I think. That means we did a
So a little bit and progress themselves and not rely upon others overall. The I really want to thank you, Nirit, for your time today. You've been delightful, and we're very grateful to you for your insights, particularly on the trends. And God, I'd love to stay in touch and work on this as a team somehow.
Oh, I'd love that. Thank you for having me. You have a wonderful podcast. I always enjoy listening to it. So glad to be here.
Thank you very much. Take care.
Have a great day.
If it's impacting the future of work, it's in the Future of Work podcast by allwork.space.